So, what happens when the very beliefs that are supposed to set you free actually become your prison? We're about to dive into a pastor's story, a 20-year struggle with addiction, and his, let's say, controversial journey to break free by questioning pretty much everything he'd ever been taught.
Okay, so this is the confession that kicks everything off. I mean, coming from a third-generation preacher, that's a really raw admission. It just opens the door to this story of an intense, hidden struggle that was happening right behind the pulpit. And this wasn't just his problem. The author points out that this is a far bigger issue than most people think. He cites this statistic that 57% of pastors have struggled with pornography. That's a silent battle being fought in a lot of churches.
So for 2 decades, 20 years, the author felt completely trapped. He describes it as this hopeless, vicious cycle of guilt and shame. And as a father of 3 boys, he was just terrified. I mean, how could he possibly lead his sons to freedom when he felt so powerless himself?
And here's the real kicker. He followed all the rules. He tried every single method the church recommended, but nothing worked. His story really forces you to ask, what do you do when the cure you're given just doesn't work?
So the first thing the author really takes aim at is what he calls purity culture. His argument is that its methods, even though they're well-intentioned, are all focused on managing the symptom, lust, but they never ever get to the root of the problem.
So you've got these 2 big ideas, right? On one side, there's sin management. It's this constant, exhausting game of just trying to avoid temptation. The author basically says this is like trading one cage for another. But on the other side is mind renewal, which is this pretty radical idea. What if you could change your actual desires so you weren't even tempted in the first place?
And get this is a direct quote he pulls from a super popular, best-selling Christian book series. He brings this up to show how the language of purity culture, in his opinion, can become really dehumanizing. It reduces women to being either, a threat you have to avoid or an object for a man's release.
This analogy he uses, it just perfectly captures his frustration. He felt like all the advice he was getting was just like wiping away cobwebs. Sure, it's a temporary fix, but the spider, the actual root of the problem, was left totally untouched, just free to spin a new web the next day.
So all of this frustration led him to this huge breakthrough moment. He realized the problem wasn't just his actions. The real prison was his own mind, and it was built out of all these lies he had subconsciously just agreed were true.
And these were the agreements, these deep-seated beliefs like, this is just how men are wired, or it's a battle every single man faces. They became a self-fulfilling prophecy for him. He argues that by accepting these ideas as the gospel truth, he was basically signing a contract that guaranteed he'd stay trapped.
So he lays out how this all works, right? It starts with identity, how we see ourselves. That shapes our perception of the world, which then fuels our desires, and finally leads to action. He says purity culture makes this huge mistake. It focuses only on step 4, the behavior. But he realized the real war had to be won way back at step 1, identity.
So what was the new identity he landed on? Well, it all came back to this one core theological idea, imago Dei. He came to believe that if he could just internalize the truth, that he and every other person is created in the image of God, that was the key. That was the only thing powerful enough to break all those false agreements.
And this quote he found from a guy named Bob Hamp just nails it. You cannot get free with a prisoner's mind. It perfectly sums up his discovery. No amount of rule-keeping was ever going to work as long as his mind was still a prison. Real freedom had to start with the revolution in his thinking.
All right, so this is where the story takes a really unexpected turn. After 20 years of failing with all the conventional methods, the author describes how this very unlikely, even controversial situation finally became the catalyst for his complete transformation.
So what was it? I mean, after decades of trying to add more rules, more accountability, more restrictions, what on earth could have broken that cycle so completely? Well, the answer is something he absolutely never saw coming.
Okay, so he calls it Christian naturism. And let's be really clear about how he defines this, because it's probably not what you're thinking. According to him, this isn't about sex at all. In fact, he claims it's the exact opposite. It's the philosophy that in a non-sexual, respectful setting, the human body can be seen not as a source of temptation, but as a reflection of God's creation, the imago Dei made visible.
I mean, just look at the before and after here. It is a total 180, a complete flip in his entire worldview.
What he once believed was obscene, he now sees as the absolute pinnacle of creation. What he was taught was basically porn, he now believes is its total opposite. This experience didn't just tweak a behavior, it fundamentally rewired his entire brain.
And this story isn't just about him. He started to see that his wife was trapped in her own kind of prison, a prison of body shame, a struggle that's reflected in these stats he brings up. So while he was objectifying bodies, she was despising her own, believing this lie that she was never, ever good enough.
And then, this is the moment it all clicks for her too. After her husband encouraged her to try and see herself through this new lens, she stood in front of a mirror, and for the very first time, as she puts it, a veil was lifted. And in that moment of just raw, unfiltered honesty, she finally saw the beauty that her husband and God had always seen. 2 prisoners, he says, were freed on the very same day.
So, in the end, his whole journey really boils down to this one big question for all of us. He argues that for 2 decades, he just kept trying to build a stronger cage. But what if freedom isn't found in a better set of rules? What if it's found in a renewed mind that doesn't even need them anymore?